The lake was silent when Emma Carter unlocked the door to the house she built from exhaustion and hope. She stepped inside, feeling the weight of years spent clawing her way back from burnout tightening in her chest. This house was meant to heal her, a quiet refuge carved out of loneliness and determination after everything fell apart. But the moment the floorboard creaked beneath her boots, she sensed the piece was fragile, a thin glass ready to crack. The doorbell rang before she could breathe, its sharp chime slicing through the stillness like a warning she failed to read. Her mother stood outside with Rick Dalton, his smirk stretching wide as if he already owned the air around her. Emma didn't know it yet, but opening that door meant inviting in the storm that would swallow her sanctuary whole. Emma stepped back as Rick walked in like the house already belonged to him. He dropped his bag in the foyer without asking where it should go. He scanned the space with a lazy grin, as if searching for the first thing he could claim. Emma tried to steady her breath, reminding herself this visit was temporary. Rick moved toward her desk before she could say a word. He spun the chair, plopped down, and leaned back until it creaked under his weight. His boots, still dusty from the driveway, landed on her polished table with a heavy thud. Emma opened her mouth to object, but the words tangled in her throat. Janet fussed with her coat, pretending not to notice the tension spreading through the room. Rick laughed, a low, careless sound that filled the space like smoke. He reached for a paperweight and tossed it from hand to hand without permission. Emma stepped forward, asking him gently not to touch her work materials. Rick shrugged, ignoring her, and kept turning the paperweight as if testing her patience. He pushed away from the desk and wandered toward her office door. Emma followed, her pulse quickening as he grabbed the handle without hesitation. He stepped inside and surveyed the shelves she spent months arranging with meticulous care. He opened drawers, rifled through pens, cables, notebooks, anything within reach. The room felt smaller with him inside, like the walls were folding inward. Emma asked him again to stop, but her voice landed soft and powerless. Rick hummed dismissively as he pulled out a notebook and flipped through her sketches. He commented on her handwriting, joking that it looked like a child's science fair project. Emma clenched her fists behind her back, fighting the urge to rip the notebook away. Janet appeared at the doorway and forced a smile, urging everyone to relax. Rick chuckled as if nothing was wrong and strolled back to the living room. He grabbed the remote and turned on the TV at a volume that swallowed the entire house. The sudden noise made Emma flinch, her calm retreat cracking under the intrusion. Rick sprawled across the couch, knocking over a pillow she had carefully placed earlier. He asked loudly why the couch was so stiff, as if she had chosen it to offend him. Emma closed the office door behind her, holding it shut for a moment to steady herself. Her sanctuary no longer felt like hers with every step Rick took. She returned to the living room to find him flipping through channels with restless impatience. Janet sat beside him, offering hollow comments to keep the atmosphere light. Emma tried to join them, but she felt like a stranger in her own creation. Rick stretched his arms across the back of the sofa, claiming more space than necessary. He looked at Emma and smirked, asking if she always kept the house this boring. Emma swallowed hard, sensing the first fracture forming deep inside her. The house she built for peace was already slipping out of her hands. Rick woke early the next morning, moving through the kitchen like a man inspecting property he intended to buy. Emma found him tugging open cabinets, slamming them shut, and muttering about the cheap hinges. He pulled out spice jars, rearranged them, then dumped a few onto the counter as if testing her reaction. Emma asked him politely to leave the pantry as it was, but he waved her off with a careless flick of his hand. He said the layout made no sense and declared he would fix it for her before the day was over. Emma watched in disbelief as he removed containers, shifting her organized rows into chaotic piles. He tugged on a shelf too hard, snapping a bracket, then blamed the house for being poorly built. Janet wandered in with a weary smile, trying to smooth things over without actually stopping him. Rick dismissed Emma's frustration and began reorganizing the fridge without permission. He tossed out produce she bought the previous day, claiming it smelled off even though it didn't. Emma gathered the discarded items with trembling hands, unsure whether to protest or endure. Rick moved next to the artwork on the hallway wall, tilting his head as if evaluating its worth. He pulled down the canvas she cherished, calling it pretentious before she could object. He replaced it with a loud, glossy print he dragged from his suitcase, a cheap landscape in plastic framing. Emma felt her chest tighten as the hallway lost its warmth in an instant. She placed the original painting gently on a chair, unwilling to let it touch the floor. Rick kept talking over her silence, acting as though his taste was a generous improvement. He wandered toward the living room and pointed at her Aeron chair, asking if it was as overpriced as it looked. Before Emma could explain its importance, he dragged it across the hardwood floor with a grinding scrape. He positioned it in front of the TV and dropped into it with a satisfied groan. Emma winced at the sound of the legs scraping, but Rick seemed pleased with his new throne. He turned the volume up again, drowning the house in static and chatter from a morning news show. Janet sat beside him and whispered apologies to Emma, but none of them changed the scene before her. Rick stretched out with ownership, flipping through channels like he was searching for something to disrespect next. Emma approached him and tried once more to ask him to treat the house with care. He smirked and said she was too sensitive and needed to relax before hosting guests. The words stung more than his actions, echoing old wounds she thought she left behind. He loudly commented on her decorations, calling them clinical and uninspired. Emma held her breath, refusing to let him see the hurt spreading across her face. Rick rose from the chair and wandered through the hallway again, touching things simply because he could. He opened drawers, lifted trinkets, and returned none of them to their original place. Emma followed him silently, feeling less like a homeowner and more like a bystander in her own story. Every step he took reshaped the space she had carefully built into something unfamiliar and hostile. She looked around and realized her sanctuary was being dismantled piece by piece. The invasion was no longer subtle. It was a steady erasure of everything she valued. And Rick didn't plan to stop. The tension in the house hit a breaking point one late afternoon. Rick stormed into the living room, holding the keys to Emma's new truck. He demanded she hand them over immediately, his voice sharp and unyielding. Emma shook her head and said she needed the truck for work and could not give it to him. Rick's grin twisted into a snarl, his patience clearly exhausted. He stepped closer, looming over her as if his size alone could force compliance. Emma backed away instinctively, feeling trapped between him and the wall. Rick lunged suddenly, swinging his hand in a wide arc. The slap connected, and Emma's cheek burned from the force. Her hand flew to her face, shock and pain mixing into disbelief. Janet rushed toward them, but instead of defending Emma, she grabbed Rick's arm. "Stop overreacting," she said, her voice trembling. Emma stared at her mother in horror, realizing she had no ally here. Rick stepped back, smirking, pleased by the chaos he had created. He muttered something under his breath about teaching her a lesson and packing the room. Emma's heart pounded as she tried to catch her breath and collect her scattered thoughts. She knew she could not reason with him in this state. Rick began opening drawers, knocking over papers in frustration. He kicked over a small stool, sending it sliding across the floor. Emma watched everything she built being disrespected, feeling her control slipping away. Janet hovered near the doorway, wringing her hands but saying nothing substantial. Rick laughed when Emma tried to intervene, mocking her voice and telling her to calm down. He reached for her laptop, but Emma quickly stepped in and blocked his hand. Rick pushed her gently, testing her resolve, and she stumbled back. He barked a command, demanding she step aside, his tone leaving no room for refusal. Emma's hands trembled, but she stood firm, refusing to give in. Rick's eyes flashed with anger, and he moved closer again. Emma's pulse raced as she realized she had to protect herself while staying composed. She noticed the camera in the corner of the room, silently recording everything. Rick kicked a stack of papers onto the floor in frustration, shoving a chair in its path. Emma counted every action, storing them in her mind as evidence for later. Rick began yelling, his voice bouncing off the walls, calling her stubborn and unreasonable. Janet cried quietly, pleading with Emma to let it go, but Rick's rage continued unchecked. He grabbed a decorative vase and tossed it onto the counter, shattering it into pieces. Emma stood frozen for a moment, the sound of breaking glass piercing the tense air. Rick glared at her, chest heaving, daring her to react. Emma clenched her fists, fighting back tears, determined not to give him the satisfaction. Janet tried again to intervene, but Rick waved her off with a dismissive flick. Emma realized the pattern. Rick thrived on chaos and intimidation, and Janet would not step in. Her sanctuary had transformed into a battlefield. Every inch of the house felt hostile, every sound amplified by fear and anger. Emma made a silent promise to herself. She would reclaim control, no matter what it took. The slap, the threats, the destruction, it all became fuel for her next move. Rick, unaware of the storm Emma was quietly preparing, continued his rampage. And in that moment, Emma decided, the fight for her home and dignity was just beginning. Emma closed the office door and exhaled slowly, forcing her pulse to steady. She needed a plan, something that would end Rick's chaos without further risk. Her eyes fell on the security camera, blinking silently in the corner. She walked over and accessed the feed from her laptop, scrolling through the morning's events. Every movement Rick made, every slammed door, every insult was captured in detail. Emma exported the videos to an external drive, labeling each clip with the time and incident. She printed a copy of the deed, showing she was the sole owner of the house. Her hands shook as she stacked the paperwork neatly, evidence of ownership and violations. Emma opened her laptop again and began organizing digital records of damages and threats. She created folders for images, videos, receipts, and correspondence with contractors. Every broken shelf, every scratched surface, every displaced object was documented meticulously. Emma typed detailed notes for each incident, noting the date, time, and Rick's actions. She glanced at her phone and scheduled a video call with her attorney, Catherine Frost. Within minutes, Catherine appeared on the screen, professional and calm. Emma explained the entire situation, walking her through each video and photo. She showed the deed, the damages, and the timeline of events that made the home unsafe. Catherine listened carefully, asking precise questions and taking notes. She confirmed that Emma had clear legal rights and that the evidence was strong. Catherine drafted a formal 48-hour eviction notice, ready to be filed immediately. Emma felt a surge of relief, knowing the law was now on her side. She printed the notice and prepared it to be served formally, following the legal steps exactly. Emma reviewed all her documentation one more time, ensuring nothing was missing. She labeled folders, double-checked timestamps, and saved backups on cloud storage. Her movements were deliberate, controlled, a stark contrast to Rick's chaotic intrusion. She sent a secure email to Catherine with all files attached, confirming everything was in order. Emma organized her schedule, blocking the next 2 days entirely for handling the eviction. She reviewed the security footage again, making clips of the most critical incidents. Emma labeled each with the corresponding paragraph from her legal notes for clarity. She rehearsed how she would handle Rick's reaction when the notice was served. Her tone would remain calm, her demeanor steady, no matter how he tried to provoke her. Emma checked the locks on her doors, confirming they were secure and functioning. She made a mental note of her exit routes in case Rick became aggressive. Every action she took reinforced her control, her ownership, and her safety. She called a neighbor to be available for support if needed, discreetly explaining the situation. Emma spent hours organizing and preparing, her focus sharpening with each step. By evening, every piece of evidence was ready, every legal detail confirmed. She leaned back in her chair, exhausted but resolute. Rick had caused chaos and fear, but Emma had regained power through careful planning. Her sanctuary was ready to be defended, law and evidence on her side. Nothing would catch her off guard again. She was prepared, and the eviction would restore her home. Emma finally allowed herself a slow, steady breath. The fight was still ahead, but for the first time, victory felt within reach. The morning of the eviction arrived, heavy and tense, with sunlight cutting through the windows. Emma stood by the front door, documents in hand, heart steady despite the anticipation. Rick was already awake, packing the living room like a predator sensing a trap. Janet hovered nearby, wringing her hands, muttering about how this could all be avoided. Rick slammed his fists on the countertop, yelling at Emma to give him a break. She ignored him, focusing on the paperwork that gave her full authority. Rick grabbed a chair and banged it against the floor, trying to intimidate her. Emma stayed calm, moving slowly to lock her office door and secure the house. He stormed down the hallway, kicking a wastebasket over in frustration. Janet tried to intercede, asking Emma to just talk it out, but her voice was weak. Rick yelled that she was overreacting and making mountains out of molehills. Emma remained silent, her eyes tracking every movement, noting potential hazards. Rick grabbed the TV remote, flipping channels aggressively, seeking attention or control. Emma did not respond, allowing him to exhaust himself with noise and chaos. He threw a pillow across the room, hitting the wall with a sharp thud. Janet winced and murmured apologies, but did nothing to stop Rick. Rick grabbed a lamp, rattling it in his hands, shouting that the house was too tight. Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself, refusing to engage in his provocations. He started yelling her name, demanding answers, growing louder with each passing minute. Emma stayed seated, holding her documents, mentally preparing for the deputy's arrival. Rick stomped toward the kitchen, knocking over a vase in a careless sweep. Janet cried softly, telling Emma to let it go, but she knew letting go meant losing control. Rick called his friends and family, trying to rally support against Emma. They shouted over the phone, pressing him to pressure her, but she ignored every call. Rick kicked the door to the office, rattling the lock in frustration. Emma's hands rested calmly on the legal documents, ready to act at the right moment. He tore through drawers, searching for something, anything to assert dominance. Emma's gaze remained steady, unshaken, observing every action as evidence. Rick picked up a chair and slammed it into a wall, leaving a dent. Janet flinched but stayed silent, unsure how to intervene without angering Rick further. Rick screamed that she was ruining everything and making his life miserable. Emma did not reply, mentally counting down the minutes until law enforcement arrived. He threw cushions onto the floor, packing and cursing, trying to provoke a reaction. Emma noted the time of each outburst, adding it to her growing mental log for Catherine. Rick stomped through the living room, dragging a rug across the floor in defiance. Janet whimpered, glancing at Emma, silently pleading for a peaceful resolution. Emma stayed resolute, knowing that compliance would only reward his behavior. Rick slammed doors, kicked furniture, and bellowed, but Emma remained unmoved. She observed his patterns, predicting his next move with calm precision. The chaos continued, tense and suffocating, a psychological battlefield within her home. Emma held her ground, ready for the deputy to arrive and restore order. She felt the power of patience and preparation, reinforcing her presence in every corner. Rick's fury was loud, but it was temporary. Emma's law and evidence were permanent. She took a slow, steady breath, waiting for the moment justice would enter the house. The sound of sirens cut through the morning air as Deputy Miller's vehicle pulled into the driveway. Emma watched from the front window, heart steady, knowing this moment had finally arrived. Rick froze mid-step, eyes narrowing as he realized the law had come for him. Janet clutched his arm, her face pale, murmuring about how unnecessary this was. Deputy Miller stepped onto the porch, badge visible, calm but authoritative. He knocked firmly on the front door, announcing himself and the purpose of his visit. Rick shoved past Emma, trying to intercept, but the deputy raised a hand to stop him. "Sir, you must comply," the deputy said evenly, his voice leaving no room for argument. Emma handed over the eviction notice, watching Rick's expression twist in disbelief. He snatched the papers, scanning them quickly, disbelief and anger flashing across his face. Janet whined, tugging at Emma's sleeve, begging her to please reconsider. Rick slammed the notice onto the counter, shouting that this was illegal and unfair. Deputy Miller remained firm, explaining the legal grounds and confirming the 48-hour timeline. Rick growled, packing the room, throwing his hands in the air, demanding exceptions. Emma stayed calm, watching each movement, noting the exact time for her records. Janet sobbed quietly, looking around at the home she had visited once with admiration. Rick shoved a chair aside, muttering threats about revenge and regret. Deputy Miller reminded him that threats would be documented and could carry consequences. Rick's voice rose, cursing, but no one flinched, no one backed down. Emma stood tall, holding her ground, her presence steady and controlled. She saw him start packing a suitcase, grabbing clothes and personal items in haste. Janet followed, still tearful, glancing at the walls as if saying goodbye to memories. Rick muttered darkly under his breath, glaring at Emma with bitter eyes. Deputy Miller instructed them to leave the property immediately, enforcing the law. Rick shoved the last items into his car, slamming doors and honking the horn in frustration. Janet leaned on the car door, crying softly, her emotions more for the loss of space than wrongdoing. Rick threatened, "You'll regret this," his voice raw and dangerous, echoing through the driveway. Emma did not respond, letting the law handle enforcement while she remained composed. The deputy guided them to the vehicle, ensuring no further confrontation occurred. Emma stepped outside after the car drove away, taking in the quiet that followed. Every sound felt sharper, every breath clearer, as the house finally felt like hers again. She walked through each room, checking locks, confirming the absence of damage. The sun streamed through the windows, warm and golden, a stark contrast to the chaos gone. Emma touched the door handles, the counter, the chair she had feared would never be hers alone again. She felt the weight lift, the tension dissolve, replaced by relief and quiet triumph. Her sanctuary, built through pain and perseverance, had survived intact. Emma smiled, knowing she had reclaimed not just her home, but her peace and authority. The storm had passed, leaving a calm that was hard-earned and deeply satisfying. She allowed herself a slow breath, savoring the first moments of true control. The house was hers, safe and quiet, and for the first time in weeks, Emma felt whole. She stepped into the living room, eyes scanning every corner, and felt the power of restored ownership. The deputy left with a nod, the driveway empty, the air still, the threat gone. Emma finally closed the door behind her, the sound firm and final, signaling a new beginning. Everything had changed, yet everything was hers, solid and unshakable. Emma moved through the house, touching surfaces she had feared would never be hers alone. She locked each door, checked every window, and installed new security measures quietly. The air felt lighter, the tension lifted, leaving space for peace to settle in. She carried out broken items, repaired scratches, and restored order to every corner. Her home, once invaded and violated, now felt like a sanctuary again. Emma set up her workspace, arranging sketches, tools, and notes with care. She sat at her desk and opened a notebook, planning her next project deliberately. Her focus turned to designing a sound therapy house for those recovering from trauma. Each idea felt like a step toward healing, not just for others, but for herself too. She walked to the lake outside, inhaling the fresh air, letting the calm wash over her. Emma smiled softly, feeling the weight of fear and chaos finally lift from her shoulders. The house stood firm, a testament to her resilience and determination. She had reclaimed her space, her life, and her peace with patience and courage. For the first time in years, she felt fully in control, fully alive and truly free. The future awaited, full of possibility, and Emma was ready to embrace it completely.